All right. I have been watching Walter Veith for the last 24 hours, and let me tell you, I am ready to explain to you everything about the Masons, the Illuminati, the Jesuits, and all of those secret societies out there. But rather, I have decided to speak to you instead about Walter Veith. And as I promised in my Adventist Clarity Project, we are going to speak about different Adventist, famous Adventist speakers out there. And today we are going to start about Walter Veith. And so that's why I did this silly reference to the Illuminati of the Masons in the beginning, because that's one of the favorite subjects of Walter Veith. But anyways, let's start. And this is our topic for today. Walter Veith is a prominent and often controversial figure in modern Adventism today. He had a difficult and rebellious childhood in South Africa. His traumatic early experiences with religion began after his mother was diagnosed with cancer and he was 8 years old. A Catholic nun pressured him to convince his mother that she had to convert to Catholicism, otherwise she would go to hell. Leading to his anger, Walter Veith's anger, not only towards the nun but also towards God, and a pivotal moment came where he tore up a Catholic catechism in front of the nun, and of course these events led him to more hate and of course to physical punishment by the people in the school. This experience, combined with a poor relationship with his stepmother after his mother's death, contributed to a deeply rebellious young child. Veith eventually became an atheist, and he studied theology at the University of Stellenbosch, where he met his wife Sonica. The couple married during his university years and experienced a series of terrifying supernatural disturbances, which led them to seek help from Catholic priests. These encounters eventually led both Walter and Sonica to convert to Catholicism. The couple's journey to Adventism began when Walter was frustrated with Catholic rituals and a priest's absence when he was trying to get confession. He decided to abandon religion, and a pamphlet left by a carpenter caught his attention. This pamphlet claimed the Catholic Church had changed God's commandments, and after consulting a Bible, Walter was shocked to find significant difference between the biblical commandments and the Catholic Catechism. This led to an in-depth Bible study with the carpenter, who happened to be a Seventh-day Adventist. And this is the moment where Walter Veith began to explore topics like creationism and biblical prophecy through the book of Daniel and Revelation. And despite his initial resistance, particularly to creationism and the Sabbath, a final phone call from a Catholic priest who claimed spirits had revealed information about Walter's father's stay in purgatory led him to question whether Catholics were working with demons. This event, along with his scientific struggles with evolutionary theory, ultimately led both him and Sonica to get baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It is important to remind also that Sonica, Walter's Veith's wife, was also a victim of a very troublesome childhood. His father was an occultist, and he practiced Scientology. Sometimes he will force her to practice that herself. So eventually, after all of these incidents throughout, not only in Walter Veith's childhood, but also during his marriage life, all of this led him to the Seventh-day Adventist. And also his interest for biblical prophecy, for secret societies, and for things that have to do often with the occult, which he claims to have first-hand information, because he was forced to deal with these things throughout many parts in his life. Okay, now let's explore how Walter Veith made his remarkable transition from the academic world to becoming a Seventh-day Adventist preacher. After Walter and Sonica's conversion to the Adventist Church, the family faced significant economic challenges. Their financial stability was precarious, forcing them to do an experiment with farming as means for survival. When agriculture proved unsuccessful, Walter received an opportunity to teach at the university again, and he was not forced to teach evolution, so he accepted the position. However, this academic position would be temporary, and eventually he would leave the world of academia entirely to persuade his calling as an Adventist preacher. And the way this developed is that in 1992 he had a connection with the Veith family that met Walter in South Africa. The Veith family became interested in Walter's preaching and his life experience, and so they invited him to preach in Canada. This meeting would prove transformative for Walter Veith's ministry. And so by 1993, Walter partnered with Wendy Veith to conduct his first major evangelistic campaign in Canada. But of course, because of Walter's preaching, this will prove to be controversial. As expected, Walter's initial message stirred significant controversy, particularly his bold preaching about the papacy. And it was during this period that Walter began to articulate why topics like papacy, the Catholic Church, and secret societies held such an important part of his preaching and his faith. In his own words, he said, I come from that world. In other words, I come from the world of the occult. I had many experiences with that, so therefore, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm preaching. And so let's take a look at this clip and how he explained his interest in secret societies and all of these topics.
My message was quite controversial because I would deal with the papacy. Now, you must understand why the papacy was so important to me and why the connections with the occult world were so important to me. Because remember, I'd come from that world and I'd had so many experiences with my father-in-law, and I knew that the occult world was not some airy-fairy thing that was happening somewhere, but that it was real, that it was involved in politics and also masonry. I started giving lectures on the secret connections and the secret societies. And as I lectured in South Africa, I had many, many experiences. Sometimes it happened that in the middle of the night, knock on the door, and here stands a person, and he was very agitated, and came in, and he said, I'm a high Freemason, and I've listened to your lectures, and I know that what you are saying is the truth on these issues, but you need a little more information. And there are books that you don't have access to, that I have access to, and I've brought you one. But if they find out that I took this book out and gave it to a non-initiated person, I will die. So you have this book until 4 o'clock tomorrow morning. Then I will come and fetch it and see that it's back in the lodge before anybody knows that it was gone. I said, all right. Now, what do I do with it? I can't read a book this thick between 12 o'clock and 4 o'clock. So what am I going to do? So I had some of those film rolls and this little black bag in that day and roll up a film and put it in the camera, and I photographed as many of the pages of the book as I could with the titles. And by 4 o'clock I had virtually done most of it, but I was also run out of film. And he came to fetch it and it was gone, and then I could start studying that. I'd also had an experience in Europe, in Germany, where after one of my lectures where I touched upon this issue, I was one of the last to walk out, or the last, because you have to, you pack up your slides, and those days it wasn't as simple as today. You had all of these slides and you have to pack them into the right sequence. And as I left the hall, I was walking down the passage and the lights were going out when a hand came out of what seemed like a closet, grabbed me from behind and pulled me into the closet. And I thought my last moment had come. And the man said to me, "If you see my face, then that will be your end. So you will not turn round, you will not look at me, you will leave this closet, you will walk out, and tomorrow I will do the same to you, and you will not know who it was, and I will give you something." So life was getting to be interesting. And the next day I gave my lecture, and I'm thinking, what's going to happen to me? And I walk out after that lecture, and I go past the closet, nothing happens, and I go past some foyer thing, and here I am. And he gives me a pile of books. And he says, "Now go. You don't know who it is. And I will fax you something. I need your number." So I gave him a fax number. And he says, "You promise that when you get the fax, you cut the top off and you burn it so that there's no sendee." I said, "I promise." And I left. And this is how information started coming.
Here is my critique of these claims of exclusive knowledge by Walter Veith. Walter Veith's reasoning regarding secret societies and the Catholic Church follows a straightforward problematic pattern, in my view. Only, he says, only I have access to this knowledge because I experienced that world firsthand. I receive special information from people who were directly involved with Freemasons. Therefore, you, listener, you must believe me when I speak about secret societies and the Catholic Church. Trust me, I know. So in my assessment, Walter Veith engages in what I call the authority game. His approach requires listeners to place their trust in him based solely on his claims of exclusive access to insider information. While he presents himself as a humble preacher, a careful examination reveals a more complex dynamic at work. The contradiction becomes apparent when we consider Veith's dual presentation. On the surface, right, he maintains the demeanor of a humble servant of God. However, when he asserts that he alone possesses access to books, information, and personal experience that nobody else has, the dynamic shifts dramatically. It is precisely at this moment when the power play begins. When the humble preacher transforms into an exclusive authority figure, climbing the ladder of epistemic knowledge and truth, then he becomes a privileged individual. And so this is the way I can assess all of these claims by Walter Veith. First, it is the problem of unfalsifiable authority. By positioning himself as the sole professor of secret knowledge, Veith makes his claims essentially unverifiable. His audience cannot independently assess the validity of his sources or the accuracy of his interpretations. The audience can only wait that one day they will also bump into somebody who has also secret knowledge, and that secret knowledge is given to them, and so only then they can corroborate Veith's claims. So of course he appeals to a special experience, and that's another problem, right? Not only special information, but also a special experience. Rather than relying on public accessible evidence or a scholarly methodology, Veith's credibility rests on personal testimony and alleged secret revelations. This shifts the burden from evidence-based reasoning to faith-based reasoning. You have to have faith in me, Walter Veith, because I know I have the special experience. And so the only problem that I see in his preachings of secret societies and the book of Revelation and so on is his intellectual isolation. When knowledge claims are based on exclusive access, they cannot be subject to peer-reviewed academic scrutiny or independent verification, the very process that typically validate or challenge extraordinary claims. Veith's presentation suggests that understanding these hidden truths about secret societies and Catholic conspiracy requires his unique perspective and insider connection. This creates a dependency relationship where his audience must choose between accepting his interpretations or remaining ignorant of these supposed realities. So, in my view, and this is how I conclude these claims of Walter Veith, while he genuinely believed in the importance of his message, the epistemological framework he employs is exclusive access to secret knowledge. This raises legitimate questions about intellectual accountability and the standards of evidence required for such extraordinary claims. The tension between humble persona and his assertions of exclusive authority represents a fundamental contradiction that deserves careful consideration by his audience. So, if I become the audience of Walter Veith, I am subject to only two possible outcomes. The first outcome is I believe him and I believe the information that he has, that he only has, and then I become dependent on him, or I reject his information, I reject his preachings and his claims, and I become this ignorant person of these realities that only Walter Veith knows. And so this puts us in a very complicated scenario. And I think that's why we should carefully consider Walter Veith's authority and preaching style as truly problematic.
One after the other. And I had so many connections. My biggest problem was always connecting the papacy, the secret societies, the Jesuits. How are they all connected? Because I knew they had to be connected because Revelation chapter 13 had said so. And the spirit of prophecy was very clear that if you study the book of Revelation, then you will know to stay clear of secret societies. And she mentions Freemasonry by name. So I knew there were connections. And I had some of the occult writings from my father-in-law, and I was studying all this stuff and putting it together. So my lectures were different from other people. They had these occult connections. And if Revelation chapter 13 says that the beast out of the sea will be the one who will be paid homage to and will control the world, and that it's spirits of demons that are doing this work, well, then the stuff is all interconnected, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was starting putting these things together, and when I got to the Massey, my first ever public campaign, this was going to be a big deal. I'd been on public campaigns, but with Francois Duplessis, I was always the sidekick. Here was something I had to do by myself, and then in a foreign land. And letters had preceded me, warning certain people that I should not talk on issues of health or something of that nature, or this or that or the other. And someone had intercepted the letter and made a copy and given it to me, so I knew it in advance. I was in trouble in a foreign land. Already I was being stabbed in the back, as it were. Get to Massey Theatre, and it seats 1,260 people.
Prophetic number.
That was weird to begin with. Now the organizers had said that you'll never fill this hall, not with something like that. And it was cold and it was wet and it had snowed a little bit and there was some ice and it had melted again. Nobody thought it was going to be full, but it was packed. And the organizers said, no more people. If it gets any fuller, then we'll have to close it. This is fire regulations. And it was packed. And we did double sessions. So you did a lecture, you had a 20 or 30-minute break, you did another lecture.
Yeah.
Now, the only people I had contact with was the AD team. And they were in the back of the hall, and I was on the stage in the front of the hall. And I had all of these slides. And there were so many people there. And while I was starting lecturing, your city sent out tow trucks to remove the illegally parked vehicles, so everybody ran out of the hall. And then to go and see whether their vehicle is being removed. But your dad went and sorted it out and went and stood in front of the trucks, and I got to know him a little bit better. He's a feisty person. He won't let himself be intimidated very readily. And so we gave these lectures. Now, there was one interesting thing. There were rows in the Massey. There were side doors and back doors. And the Massey Theatre was packed, but there was one seat that was open. Just one. And there was always the seat in the front in the first block. And that was always open. Now, why would that always be open? That's weird, because anybody can sit anywhere. There were no seat assignment. And halfway through my first lecture, the side door would open, which normally would not open during a lecture. And this little fellow with Down syndrome came in. And he would walk up and down the front there, and he was very stocky, short, and his tongue hung out. Sort of, and he sang. He sort of, la, la. He wasn't a nuisance. He was just there. And then he used to sit down in that chair. And I gave the whole lecture. And then everybody would go. And then I started getting into the serious topics, talking about the Antichrist, giving these Bible lectures, bringing in some of this newer information. And there was a crowd there that got very angry. At one stage, they actually ran on the stage and shouted that I am the Antichrist and that the people should get out and not listen to me. And they were very irate and very aggressive. And in between the break, they would corner me and they would be aggressive. And some of them actually wanted to hit me. And there was no one to help me because the IT team was in the back, I was in the front. There was an audience between them and me, mingling, getting up, stretching their legs in this aggressive crowd. And I tried to appease them, but it got worse and worse. And then this little guy with Down syndrome, he used to get up and he'd take his short, stocky little arms and he'd work his way through the crowd. And then he'd come and stand next to me and he'd put his arm around me and he'd put his head on my shoulder here, on my side. He only came up to here. And then he'd look at them and he'd sing with his little la la, la la la. Now, if there's anything that's disarming, it's someone with a little Down syndrome boy stuck to him. There's no way you're going to hit someone who has a Down syndrome boy stuck to him. And so the time would come for the next session and I'd go back up onto the stage, he would go and sit down. And the next day the same thing. Now I got very dependent upon him. And sometimes, because he always came in sometime during the first lecture, he wasn't there from the beginning. Sometimes he didn't pitch.
At this point, Walter Veith's self-presentation extends beyond claims of exclusive knowledge to encompass what could be described as a prophetic persona. He positions his presentations about Bible prophecy and secret societies as fundamentally different from others, asserting a special privilege and understanding these connections. According to his narrative, he tried hard to connect the dots between Catholic institutions and secret societies, and despite the difficulty, succeeded. Of course, due to my special experience and information that I gather directly from the occult world. And so this become a savior sort of prophet narrative that Walter Veith begins to convey. At this point, Veith's role transforms from researcher to what resembles a savior figure. His story follows a familiar pattern, right? Once the enemy of truth recognizes that he will expose what he has discovered, persecution begins. This opposition serves to reinforce his prophetic status. After all, true prophets have always faced resistance. Perhaps most telling is how Veith interprets coincidental events as divine confirmation of his mission. When exactly 1,260 people attend his lecture, he didn't see this as mere chance or coincidence, but of prophetic significance. And this is of course a reference to Revelation 12:6, where the woman flees into the wilderness for 1,260 days while being persecuted by the dragon for bait. This numerical coincidence becomes God's way of communicating. Continue. You have important truth to reveal. So the narrative reaches its climax when stories of divine protection become ways to show Veith's prophetic authority. When threatened by those opposed to his message, Veith described being defended by a boy with Down syndrome, whom he characterizes as a sort of heavenly protector sent by God. This interpretation transformed a simple act of human kindness, or probably just a random act, right, into a cosmic validation of his prophetic calling. And so, 4 things are important to highlight in this presentation, in this part by Walter Veith. First, opposition confirms prophetic status. I, Walter Veith, I have prophetic authority and I have a status because I have a position. Second, what could be easily called a coincidence becomes divine signs of Walter's mission. And also, protection equals heavenly endorsement. The Lord is protecting me, therefore I am being endorsed by God to continue saying what I am saying. And so criticism validates the importance of the message. Quite astonishing claims from Walter Veith. The opposition he faces reinforces his prophetic status. Coincidental becomes heavenly signs. Protection equals heavenly endorsement. I mean, I don't doubt that God protects his people, his believers, because we have that in the Bible. But when every time God protects somebody, it becomes an endorsement of what they are doing, it tells you the problematic of this claim. And of course, criticism validates the importance of the message. People who criticize Walter, people who go after him, it reinforces to him or gives him the impression that this is God telling him, your message is true, continue doing my work. And so we've got a new prophet among Adventists. That prophet is in the name of Walter Veith. Next time we will continue with some specific claims that Walter Veith does surrounding secret societies, Bible translations, the Catholic Church, the Book of Revelation, the Book of Daniel, and some other topics that we will try to cover for next presentations. Thank you for joining to the Adventist Clarity Project. This is a podcast that seeks to bring clarity to the Adventist Church, its mission, and its institutions. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye-bye.